Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar on practical strategies for integrating disability support programs into the equity conversation. We are delighted that Lindsay Eigenar and Dr. Bridget Herring accepted the invitation and will be providing what we believe will be useful information for the California community colleges and partners that have joined us today. Before I introduce the presenters, please allow me to address a few important and some logistical items. I am Will Francis, Project Director for Post-Secondary Education at the Tarjan Center. The Tarjan Center at UCLA is a federally designated Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities and your host for today's webinar. Support for today's webinar comes from the California Community Colleges Chancellor's Office through a contract that enables us to provide technical assistance and training to community colleges DSPS or DSS or DSP working to provide equitable support, services, and opportunities for students with disabilities, including students with intellectual disabilities and autism. We have provided a PowerPoint and 2 PDF documents for today's call. We recommend that you have those documents handy as the presenters will refer to them during the call. A number of our colleagues are unable to attend today's webinar, but ask for a recording of the proceedings. In order to facilitate access to a clean recording of the webinar, we have muted all calls. Please allow the phones to remain muted. As we proceed through the presentation, our presenters would love to respond to your questions as they arise and as they relate to the content of their presentation. Please take a look at the bottom of the Zoom program display where you should find a chat or text box. We are asking that you insert your questions in the chat box throughout the duration of the webinar. We will be sure to address your questions and welcome you to submit as many questions as naturally arise. This may be a good time to test your chat function. Please enter a greeting into the chat box. Thank you. Many of your institutions are currently having conversations about equity and other student services designed to assist students to complete their educational goals. A few months ago, Dr. Bridget Herring presented on a webinar in which we laid some foundation in describing how to identify if students are experiencing disparate impact and need additional supports and programs to help them attain their academic success. If you did not attend the previous webinar and believe you could benefit from the previous content, please let me know by so indicating in the chat box. This presentation will provide some basic information about the calculations that are necessary to establish if students can be supported with equity funds, and the presentation will further provide practical information on how students with disabilities may be supported with equity dollars. Thank you for joining us today, and now without further ado, I will provide some information about our speakers. Lindsay Eigenar currently serves as the College to Career Manager at Santa Rosa Junior College, a position she has held since the program's inception in 2011. She's been a tireless advocate for underrepresented populations in education throughout her career and has demonstrated that through the creation of curriculum and program policies and procedures for the College to Career program. In addition to incorporating the needs of students with intellectual disabilities and autism into the Santa Rosa Junior College Student Equity Plan, she applied and obtained the designation of Comprehensive Transition and Post-Secondary Program from the U.S. Department of Education. Through this designation under the Higher Education Opportunity Act of 2008, students with intellectual disabilities without a high school diploma have access to federal financial aid while attending the College to Career program. In 2013, Ms. Eigenauer served on Santa Rosa Junior College's Strategic Plan Initiative. In her capacity of manager of the College to Career program, she has overseen 7 cohorts of students, 4 graduations, and 44 successful job placements, including all of the graduates of the first cohort. Lindsay is an instructor with the Disability Resource Department where she teaches 6 courses. Before obtaining her assignment at Santa Rosa Junior College, Lindsay served as a classroom teacher and counselor in a residential treatment facility and a substitute teacher in the San Francisco K-12 system. Ms. Eigenauer earned a master's degree in special education, as well as credentials in mid to moderate special education and a multiple subject teaching credential. Welcome, Lindsay. Dr. Bridget Herron currently serves as the Associate Dean for Research and Planning at San Diego Mesa College and as the co-director of the Center for Organizational Responsibility and Advancement. She is a lecturer in the Educational Leadership Doctoral Program at San Diego State University, and she is the Regional Director of the San Diego and Imperial Counties Community College Association's Regional Faculty Internship Program. Dr. Herron also serves as Adjunct Faculty of Psychology and Public Health at Miracosta, Cuyamaca, Southwestern, and Mesa Community Colleges. She brings nearly 10 years of experience as a researcher, including work in psychology, psychiatry, institutional research, and research in higher education. Dr. Herron began her research career as a post-baccalaureate research volunteer at Portland State University. She then served as a research associate at UC San Diego and Grossmont Cuyamaca Community College District, a doctoral graduate assistant at San Diego State University, and a research analyst for student success and equity at Miracosta College. Most recently, Dr. Herron, in collaboration with Dr. Luke Wood from San Diego State University, co-founded the Center for Organizational Responsibility and Advancement, an organization which supports the development of educational professionals in advancing their capacity to serve historically underrepresented and underserved students. Dr. Herron completed a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology at the University of Southern Mississippi. She completed a Master of Arts degree in forensic psychology at John Jay College in New York City and completed a doctorate at San Diego State University in educational leadership with an emphasis in post-secondary education and community colleges. Welcome back, Dr. Herron. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the ID, DD, and Autism KPED SIG for helping us to organize today's webinar. It is through their collaboration with us that the topic of equity was identified as content that is of interest to the colleges. Thank you all for joining today's webinar. And thank you to Dr. Herron and Ms. Eigenauer for your willingness to share the wealth of your knowledge with the California community colleges. And now, without further ado, here is Dr. Herron.
Thank you so much, Will. And thank you, Lindsay, for collaborating on this really important webinar. And for those of you who were here a month ago, or longer, I guess now, welcome back. We're going to start by doing a brief overview of the student equity program in the state of California. And since my background is in research, I will be focusing primarily on ways that you can identify disproportionate impact for the students that you serve, some really practical resources for you to use that are available publicly, as well as talking about how we define and measure disproportionate impact. And then I'll kick it over to Lindsay for some more on-the-ground experiential information about her programs and her experiences at Santa Rosa Junior College. So here's just as an overview of the student equity program in the state of California. Even though student equity has been around for a number of years, it received quite a facelift about 3 or 4 years ago with the passage of the Student Success Act and the subsequent development of the Student Equity Program and the funding that was associated with the Student Equity Program in the California Community College Chancellor's Office. Part of that funding required that colleges develop student equity plans, and the plans were given some pretty clear guidelines as far as what they should include and how different research should be included as part of the planning process. So I'm going to talk about each of these 5 areas and how we measure disproportionate impact, how DSPS is included, and what the requirements are for including students with disabilities in the equity planning process, general strategies, and then how to collaborate across campuses. So in general, the student equity plan uses momentum points as a framework for assessing equity. The Chancellor's Office released a template for the student equity planning process a few years back that included each of these areas as separate indicators. So we first measure access. So in other words, does the demographics of your student body represent the demographics of your service community? Course retention and course success, which is looking at students who complete a course through the semester and earn a grade. And then course success, which is the students who complete a course and earn a passing grade of A, B, C, or pass. And then basic skills progression, which measures the completion through our basic skills sequences, including math, English, and ESL or ESOL. And then degree completion, which is the completion of a degree, associate's degree, or certificate, and transfer, which is tracked at the state level, which is direct transfer into a 4-year university. For each of these indicators, we measure what's referred to as disproportionate impact. And disproportionate impact is defined in Title V, and it essentially indicates whether or not there are certain groups that are disproportionately achieving certain outcomes as compared to their counterparts, or disproportionately not achieving outcomes as compared to their counterparts. And the Chancellor's Office, in collaboration with, I believe, USC's Center for Urban Education, as well as information that they used from other research organizations, developed 3 different methodologies as a way to measure disproportionate impact. The first is the 80% rule. So the 80% rule really stems from the Equal Opportunity Employment Guidelines, which indicates that you compare the percentage of a subgroup to the outcome or percentage of a reference group. So the reference group is often the majority group. And in many of our campuses, the majority group may be our white students, or another way that the 80% rule can be identified is the highest achieving group. So whatever group that happens to be on your campus. So you would look at the success rate of that group and then compare the success rate of all other groups to that group. So if your reference group had a success rate of 100%, then every other group should have a success rate of 80% or higher in order to indicate that no disproportionate impact exists. As the success rate falls below that 80% threshold for your disaggregated subgroups, that would indicate disproportionate impact. Another methodology we use is called the percentage point gap. So percentage point gap is probably the most straightforward of the different methodologies, and it simply compares the subgroup's success rate to the overall success rate. So you're comparing basically any disaggregated population to the average or to the total success. And this doesn't necessarily come with a threshold regarding when DI sort of is said to exist or not exist. because average is there, because there will always be groups that fall perhaps slightly below or slightly above average. What institutions have to do with percentage point gap analysis is identify what the threshold will be on for their groups regarding what is an acceptable gap between different groups in order to sort of interpret that gap as sort of just by chance versus that gap being so persistent or so significant that that gap really indicates disproportionate impact. Another advantage to percentage point gap analysis is you can also take that gap percentage and multiply it by the number of students that exist within that group to identify how many additional successes would be needed in order to close the gap. And that's been really helpful in working with faculty and administrators and classified staff as you really try and humanize the research and help people understand what it might take in order to close gaps that exist with our student population in terms of outcomes. And then the last methodology is called proportionality index or equity index. And essentially it looks at the focal group's proportion of a starting group. So in other words, if you have, imagine a pie chart, and I think I don't have a picture of it here. Imagine a pie chart, and if your group represents 40% of that pie chart at the beginning, in other words, the group that enters a course or the group that enters a cohort, then your group should represent 40% of the pie chart in the successful group. So of those who successfully complete a course, that group should also represent 40%. So in other words, proportionality index indicates that that the group is taking up the same share of the pie as it moves through various momentum points. Proportionality index can be especially useful in looking at sort of momentum points in smaller chunks. So you can look at the students who come onto your first-time students who come onto your campus, and the proportion of students that fall into each group that you're referring to, and then you can look at the share of each of those groups at a momentum point of completion of 12 units, a momentum point of completion of 30 units, completion of 45 units, completion of 60 units, and so on. And that will really allow you to see where students are falling out of the pipeline, and if certain groups seem to be falling out at different times. So that can be really helpful in that process as well. So when it comes to how we disaggregate and the required disaggregations at the state level, there are 7 required disaggregations, and race and ethnicity, gender, age, low-income student status, veteran status, current or former foster youth status, and students with disabilities. And I want to highlight for a moment the verbiage that's used here. They indicate students with disabilities, and the way we have operationalized that on most of our campuses is students who utilize services in our DSPS or DSS or DSP offices. And as I'm sure you guys are all aware, there are certain limitations to that definition because it's likely that there are students on our campus who have disabilities who either haven't self-identified, or even if they have self-identified, they aren't utilizing services through our programs. And those students are not captured in this data. So that's something that's context that should be considered when you're looking at the data when it refers to students with disabilities as a required disaggregation. But the way that we've operationalized it is a narrow group of students with a very limited definition. So I want to take a minute here and talk about some of the really practical tools that are available out there for you to access data. I mentioned in the last two webinars that the big push, well, across the state, data-informed decision-making and inquiry-based decision-making is obviously very important in the work that we're doing, and that is especially so in the equity work. So as you move forward in trying to integrate DSPS into the work that's being done in the equity departments or programs within your campuses, they're likely going to ask you to provide some information about your student population that rationalizes whatever resources you're asking for or whatever programming you're looking to start. And so I wanted to propose a couple of different places where you can get that information. So first, just to point out, this is fall 16 data, and this looks at the statewide unduplicated headcount as well as credit enrollment of students who fall into various categories. This is what we refer to as our special groups or special POPs data set, and it is found on the California Community College Office Data Mart. And you'll notice here that just under 6% of California Community College students receive services from DSPS, which is a significant number of students. And so it is really important that we make sure that we're integrating these large programs together so that we can leverage resources and best serve our students. So I'm going to pull in a screen here just to show you where I found this information. So this is the California Community College Chancellor's Office website here that you're looking at. And across the top are various categories that you can look for data. So the data set that I just showed you is under the Students tab, and it is under, sorry about that. Annual term student count. Oh, no, sorry. It's not annual term student count. It's under special population group student count. And you can do a statewide search. You can also search for your college. I'm just going to pick the first one, so no favorites there. And you can pick a term, and then you can see for your college where your student population is. And here you see DSPS, which is the fourth row down. And you can see the unduplicated headcount, the enrollment, the credit full-time equivalent student. This is also something that might be very important or relevant in the conversations you have, credit as well as non-credit. And then you can see others and how they compare to other special populations as well. Another area that you can look at is under student services. There's disabled student programs and services tab as well. And you can do the same thing here, searching through districts or college. So if we do the same college, again, we can do a term search, and you can include multiple terms. And then you can see the reported disability for each student that is included in that at that school under the DSPS category. So this also, if you're looking to serve a specific subpopulation within your disabilities program, this information can be really useful. And then the last place that I'm going to show you is under the Outcomes tab, and it's Student Success Scorecard Metrics. And the Student Success Scorecard is what many colleges have used to develop their equity plan, and it's the data that has informed the campus-based research portion of many of the equity plans. And this data does include disability student service, disabled students programs and services. Sorry about that. And again, you can select, we'll do statewide here. You can select any one of these metrics, so persistent, and you can find the definitions of all of these down here in the documentation section. But let's, for the sake of ease, let's choose the completion metric. That just indicates the student completed a degree, a certificate, or transferred. We can look at the overall rate and the cohort year. And then if you click on the DSPS tab and update it, so we saw the overall rate was 48%. And then we can see the difference in the completion rate for those who received DSPS services and those that did not receive DSPS services. And here we see a gap of, just under 9%. So that, I would say in most cases, would indicate disproportionate impact at the college. Again, the college really has to set their threshold for what the percentage point gap, what an acceptable gap is in order to identify disproportionate impact. But this would be definitely a useful tool in identifying disproportionate impact at your college. And Will, I'm guessing you're going to hop in when there's a question, and I'll keep going until you tell me otherwise.
That is correct.
Okay, perfect. So another piece of information that I think is really useful to know is that at the state level, and I'm sure many of you have heard about this, but there's movement to integrate many of our categorical programs, including currently a really active pursuit of integration between our SSSP programming, our student equity program, and our basic skills initiative. That is the current integration and alignment project that's happening at the state level that's being filtered down to the colleges. But I wanted to point out that in a memo that went out in September 2016 by the Chancellor's Office, the Chancellor clearly indicated a plan to continue to pursue other similar improvements, which to me indicates probably wider and more pervasive integration across our campuses between many of our categorical programs, including, I would imagine, DSPS, EOPS, and many other programs that exist on our campuses now. And I have a link here, and I'm not gonna pull it in because I think my website is working, or my internet is working kind of slowly. But you can link on that website, and it'll show you a number of different resources for how that integration process is working, and some rationale for why the Chancellor's Office has decided to go this direction. And then here at the bottom, you see an example of how the integration in the BSI Student Equity and SSSP plan is operationalized. And this is a quote directly from the Integrated Student Success Plan that the Chancellor's Office released a few months ago. So this is, in December, the Student Equity and Student Success folks on each of your campuses will be submitting their plan, their Integrated Student Success Plan, to the Chancellor's Office. And this question is included: how will your college accomplish integration of matriculation, instruction, and student support to accomplish student success goals? How will your college ensure coordination across student equity related categorical programs? So they're really, again, they're really looking at integration as being vital to the way we spend our resources and the way that we improve in working across different programs. Another area that I think is really important in terms of including and identifying students who really could benefit from equity programming is looking at intersectional identities, which I gave you a definition here, and I'm sure most of you are aware of this term, but just so we're all on the same page, overlapping or intersecting social identities and related systems of oppression, domination, or discrimination. So for intersectional identities, one thing that I think is really important and can really serve to help integrate DSPS into the conversation a little bit more is looking at who the students are who are involved in your disability support programs. So over 2/3 of students in DSPS programs across the state are students of color. Over 30% are men of color. And those are two just quick data points that I pulled out of the Data Mart data that I showed you a second ago. And I'm sure if you dug into your local data, you would find some similar trends or patterns that would allow you to really identify who the students are that are most in need within your programs, and then do those students overlap with programming that is already existing on your campus? And is there a way to incorporate DSPS services into existing programming in a way that's more meaningful for the students who are being served? And then the last is, Lindsay and I are both going to give you a brief description of each of our sites and how they're sort of structured. And then Lindsay's going to take over and talk about in a case example at Santa Rosa. And I know that future Dr. Francis Will indicated that I am currently the Associate Dean at Mesa College. I am very new in this role and came just one short month ago from Miracosta College. So that is the information I'm providing here. The structure at Miracosta is that we have a full student equity department, full-fledged department with a director, support staff, and the director oversees our student equity committee. That committee is a subgroup of our student success committee, which is a governance committee on our campus. The funding, the bulk of the funding that came with our equity allocation was really allocated during the planning process. However, there is still small amounts of money that are available for faculty, staff, and administrators to request via a request form. You do have to really tie it very closely to the goals that are already outlined in the student equity plan. DSPS was obviously integrated into the disproportionate impact study. However, beyond that, there was, I'll say at Miracosta College, very little integration, intentional integration with DSPS support services, which is something that I think many colleges are looking to shift towards that more intentional integration. And then I'm going to pass it over to Lindsay and let her talk about Santa Rosa.
Thank you, Dr. Herron. So here at Santa Rosa Junior College, we have we were pretty early to hire a director of student equity who started a program. It's housed in the student services side of the college. And we also have a student success and equity committee with representatives and constituents across campus, across the college to make sure that they are included in the plan and the ongoing evaluation and integration of student equity. The funding strategies available on our campus, you can apply for grants it used to be on a it used to be on a permanent basis, and now they're doing more one-time funding and kind of figuring out with the state, which programs are working, how much money they have ongoing, and so forth. The process to ensure reallocation of funding that was made very clear to us here at Srjc from the very beginning is that the evaluation the evaluation of your project, if you had requested funds and were given funds, the evaluation of your project was essential to reallocation of funds. Yet you actually have to show that your program is making a difference and closing the gap on the equity in order to ensure that your project's going to continue. And like I said, here at Srjc, some of the projects are ongoing, and some are on a one-time basis as funding is available. I do want to mention that here at Srjc, we have one of the largest DSPS programs in the state. In 2014-15, we had about 8% of our students enrolled, which was over 3,000 students in DSPS. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit more about our student equity program and the specific projects that I oversaw. So just using Santa Rosa as an example, you can read the student equity plan. It's the third link there, and I'm going to reference that in just a moment. I think we have a pretty good website in terms of what's available, all of the data, the projects that are existing already, how to get involved, that sort of thing. So you can obviously reference your own student equity websites, or you can look at ours for another example. So the third link there will bring you to the Srjc student equity plan. And what I just want to note there is there's an overview of the 32 activities that are currently being offered that were written into the Srjc student equity plan. And DSPS was included in each of the 5 indicators. So, for example, the first success indicator is access. We have 9 of those projects built into the student equity plan. One of them is directly for DSPS. For the success indicator of course completion, there are 10 projects here at Srjc and 1 is in DSPS. For the ESL and basic skills success indicator, we have 5 projects here at Srjc, 1 is DSPS. We have 3 degree and certificate completion projects, again 1 is DSPS, and same for transfer, 5 projects and 1 is DSPS, so that you can see that you can get involved in different levels. And some of the projects that are described, we already had going on and we weren't requesting new funding for. So for example, we have a transition to college club. It's for high school students transitioning from high school into college. And we were written into the student equity plan to show here's services that we're already offering. They're under constant evaluation. We're not requiring, or we're not requesting extra funds at this point for that project, but we wanted to show that we're already providing equity services. Okay, next slide, please.
While you're moving to the next slide, we have a question in the chat box. The question is it fair if DSPS was denied student equity funds based on funds currently setting in DSPS budget, though we were ranked high on proposals submitted to the SEC for student equity needs?
Okay, so I assume that you're talking about funds based on currently setting in DSPS budget, so it's part of the categorical funding. Is it fair that they were denied. I would say it depends on what the criteria was for receiving funding. I would imagine that the Student Equity Committee had a rubric, and it's possible that one of the pieces on the rubric was, is there an additional source of funding? And I think that's used as a qualifier. So in terms of, is it fair? I think that depends on what the requirements of funding were. But Dr. Heron might have something else on that.
Yeah, no, I was going to say the same thing, Lindsay. I think it really depends on, what the process was. Many colleges are using rubrics. Many colleges have clear, identified ways that they're allocating money. I guess it's hard for, I think, us to speak to what is or isn't fair without that context.
Mm-hmm. So my suggestion is, it sounds like this maybe happened at this college. So what I would do if that happened, if that was the reason for not being approved, is ask for clarification from the committee and maybe come up with a different way to go about it. Maybe find a different way to say, yes, we do have categorical funding for this, but here's the reasons we still need funding despite that. So you could try that, but first I would gain clarity about the evaluation process. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the slide that's up on your screen now. This is a graphic representation, or a graphic representing the linkage between different, I'm sorry, I just got that chat pop up there. Okay, this is representing how student equity is currently represented across campus and constituent groups. And you can see down there in the bottom left, it says other districts initiatives. If you're not familiar with HSI, that's Hispanic Serving Institution, that's a federal designation. And then KFES is a program for foster youth through EOPS, and there's some other things there. So even though those populations were not identified as disproportionately impacted and written specifically into the student equity plan, if you are part of one of those constituent groups, you can still have input and linkage into the plan at your college. And then, of course, in the bottom right there, you'll see the student support program. So if you're curious about what's already being integrated into the plan, you might find something like this at your own college. Next slide, please. So what I've done is I've come up with some 7 basic steps about how you can start to integrate the student equity priorities at your campus for students with disabilities and DSPS students, and how to leverage equity resources even if you aren't using funding. So as I mentioned when I started, read your student equity plan. It's usually a pretty hefty document, but you'll find that you don't have to go over it with a fine-tooth comb. You can get the gist of the priorities at your campus, what's already existing, what they're looking for, funding sources, that sort of thing. So it's a really good idea as kind of a foundation in starting this process, just to read that plan. The second step that I recommend is to find your point person on campus. Like Dr. Heron said, they've got a whole, at Maricosta, they've got a whole department with a director. Here at Srjc, we also have a director of student equity. But it might be that your point person has been identified within your department already as serving on the committee or that sort of thing. But yeah, find the point person on your campus or your district, whichever works for you. The third thing I recommend is to familiarize yourself with the process. And what I mean by that is, if I do want to get involved, how do I do that? If I do want to request funding, how do I do that? If I want feedback about requesting funding or why my proposal was rejected, how do I do that? So just familiarize yourself with the process before you get started. I'll give another example there. A colleague of mine in DSPS submitted a proposal that was not approved, and she knew that I had written two that did get approved, and she said, can you just take a look at why you think this wasn't approved? And she wasn't really used to grant writing and managing funds and that sort of thing. So I gave her a little bit of feedback for her to submit that request again next year. So if you know somebody who can just give you some tips about grant writing or getting involved, that might help as well. The fourth thing is determining your need. So, you could ask yourself, what have I determined to be essential in closing this equity gap for the students that I serve? And the second question is, what is the district or what is student equity determined to be essential? And how do you align those two things? Both what you and the research have determined to be essential and what the equity committee has determined to be essential. Because they have a budget, they're doing very specific things with guidelines from the state. So you have to make sure that the needs you identify fit within their parameters. The fifth thing would be to determine how to get your needs met. Is it that you need to hire someone? Is it that you need to just get some consultation? Is it that you need to provide better training to students? Is it that you need to buy software? Is it that you need access to a computer lab a little bit more, or a stipend to do some sort of tutoring project or something like that? So maybe it's just that you need consultation from the group to reorganize some of your services. So you need to write into your proposal what your plan is to meeting that need. I mean, I'll go into that a little bit more. So the sixth thing that I recommend is you can use my materials that I'm going to review in a minute as an example. I know it can be very daunting to start from scratch. So if it's helpful for you to just look at how I secured the funding here at Srjc, I welcome you to review that example. And number 7 is break down the data. Evaluation on both the qualitative and quantitative level will help ensure that you get refunded. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so here at Srjc, we currently have 4 projects that are being funded. Success coaching and executive functioning support for both the College to Career program and all DSPS students. And what that does is provide enhanced support for students both inside and outside the classroom, including communicating with the instructors via email or in person, office hours, that sort of thing. And also assistance with executive functioning skills such as planning, organization, and calendaring. The last 2 programs are both tutoring. One of them is specialized algebra tutoring for DSPS students in general, and the second tutoring program is specialized basic skills tutoring for the College to Career program students. So that's math, English, the DRD classes, that sort of thing. And we all know that the students in DSPS often need more support in tutoring that a typical tutor may not be equipped to provide. So we use some specialized training models to train the tutors to support those the special needs of the students in tutoring. The success indicators that I incorporated into the proposals for course completion, access, and basic skills, they got a little bit recategorized when they were incorporated into the student equity plan, but that's what I identified as the success indicators. Oh, thank you for that clarification, Will. I shouldn't use the acronyms. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to one of the PDFs that I sent out, the proposal. So I'll do that now. Okay, so this is what the Srjc student equity proposal looks like for the 2015-16. And I'm just going to scroll down here. This is basic information about the application, and I just highlighted there the targeted populations. What was really nice about I'm going to make this just a touch smaller. What was really nice about the application at Srjc was they listed what was eligible as expenditures and activities, and they also told us what was not eligible as expenditures, which is helpful when you write your proposal. You don't want to include something that's automatically going to be rejected. Okay, so you can see here just the total funds we requested. I was pretty conservative when I requested funding because I knew that the less I requested, to the minimum I needed to provide the service, the more likely it was to get approved.
Lindsay,
Okay,
can I just hop in for, sorry, Lindsay,
sure.
I want to hop in for 1 second. I noticed on your form that you have an area for the non-allowable expenses, and I just wanted to let everyone know that some of these areas, in light of the shift to the integrated plan for student equity, some of these non-allowable expenditures may have changed. So at the end of the presentation, there's a couple links that go to the Chancellor's office that will show what all the non-allowable expenses are that might shift the way you think about how you might be spending your resources for your department. Sorry for interrupting.
Yes. No, thank you for adding that. It's probably good to recognize that this is an example, and to please refer to the updated standards and also what you hear at your campus as what's allowable and not allowable, because it might change from site to site. All right, the main thing that I focused on in my proposal was describing my project. You have to recognize that when you submit these, you might not know the person who's evaluating it. It might be a team of people who aren't familiar with your program. So you really have to paint a clear picture of why you need the services and what the services are. In as detailed as you can. So you can see here I talked about why we need more support for a student success coach intern. So just to back up a little bit, the success coaching that was improved, I talked about in the last slide there, is for executive functioning, supporting students in the classroom, and so forth. So that's what I'm reviewing here, is that proposal. So we had, you can see there on the screen, 1 permanent 50%, 10-month coach, and for 60 students, and it just wasn't enough. So we said, here's why we need some funding for an intern for this position as well, and we were approved. And you'll see throughout this proposal, it's referred to as a vocational skills coach. It's now a student success coach, but the old vernacular is in here. And then I made sure to put in here, to include here, here's the rate of pay, here's how much we need. So they want both the description of the services and they want to know exactly what you need. Let's see here. As I said before, we have the 1 part-time permanent success coach, and so this was an enhancement to that existing project. We had to discuss a little bit about the evaluation methods that we would include, a timeline, and I thought this one was really essential. Describe how the project could be expanded or brought to scale in the future. I thought that would be something that the committee looked at heavily, is, you know, how can we continue this? How is this not just a one-time service? How are you sustaining equity on the campus? And as an example, here on the Srjc campus in Santa Rosa, we have a PALS program, which some other people might have as well. It's the peer assisted learning program, where your peers, your college age students are assisting with tutoring. They're being paired with a certain section, and it's really increased success rates. So that was tried on a pilot level. That's a little bit of what we were creating with our success coaches, and then it's now in hundreds of sections across the campus. It started with 5 and 10 and then dozens, and now it's really integrated into our campus as a success measure. And then you'll see down here at the very bottom, the last one was a budget. You know, they want all of the information. They don't want to have to manage your projects. You have to show that how the exact funding that you're requesting. So that's what I did there. I'm just going to double check. Will, you'll let me know if there's questions on that?
I will. You're doing fine.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the project evaluation. Just a moment here. Okay. So here is the evaluation of that project. So just to recap, we submitted the proposal for funds in the early fall of 2015. We were rewarded those funds, and then at the end of the semester, you can see here, June, we were required to turn in our evaluation of the project. So I'm just going to review that for a few minutes here. I don't have number 1 here. I'm going to focus on some of the other parts of the evaluation. The number 2 there you can see is that to provide a summary of challenges or successes. It's really important to say both of those things. You know, what went well and what can you do better than if you were re-granted the funds. Okay. Number 3 was to provide a description of how you evaluated your program's effectiveness. So this was kind of the meat and potatoes of the evaluation. I looked at attempted units versus completed units. I'm going to make this a little smaller here. We compared the number of success coach or skills coach meetings with the student's grade point average for both semesters. And we also did a qualitative study through SurveyMonkey. Okay, one thing that I noted here was we could not find a clear correlation between completion of courses and number of contacts with the skills coaches. And percentage of units completed or over units attempted. So I was able to say, look, this didn't really have a clear impact on completion of courses, but what it did have an impact was you can see the average number of skills coach contacts and GPA. There's a clear correlation there. So I thought it was really important both to show both sides of that. Hey, we thought it was going to help to have, to say the more times you come to see a skills coach, the better chances you have of completing the course are. So we were not able to show that, but we were able to show the number of a correlation between the number of skills coaches appointments and the grade point average. So even though students were persisting through the course, meeting with the skills coach helped improve their grades overall. And you can see there up right above the graph or the chart there, I described a few of the outliers. One thing that we were able to show was retention or persistence from semester to semester to semester. So as part of the College to Career program at Srjc, it's a 3-year program for students and it's a cohort program. A lot of you are probably starting to see cohort programs pop up across your campus, some of them grant funded, some of them not. Because they are one predictor of retention in programs and in college. So you can see here, this cohort right here, the class that graduated in 2016, they had a big drop-off in their first couple semesters here. But when the Success Coach intern was implemented in fall 2015, there was 0 attrition there. And you can also see that here with cohort 2017, the students were graduating this year, there was 100% retention or persistence from semester to semester for that cohort as well. So both cohorts of students, there were 100% retention of students, which is pretty incredible. You can see here for the third cohort that was in school that year, there was only 1 student who left. So out of 29, 39, 49, 51 students, we only lost 1 that entire year. You can see that right here. I showed a little bit of the qualitative data here. Actually, it's down here at the bottom. Here are some of the comments from this survey. And then here is some of the quantitative data from the survey. How many times students use their planner, a pretty basic college skill. We were able to show increased or decreased for never and increased in several days each week and every day. We also asked about test-taking strategies and communication with instructors, and in both, and whether or not a skills coach helps contribute to you staying in the school. And for all three of those questions, students rated 8 or more out of 10 about whether or not their skills coach impacted any of those 3 areas. So even though we didn't see that come out in the data, the students were self-reporting that the skills coach contributed to their success in those 3 areas. Okay, so that's all I wanted to cover from both the proposal and the evaluation. So Dr. Heron, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Do you want me to move forward a slide?
Yes, please. Sorry. Okay. So just as a recap, the importance of evaluation, it's really important that you ensure that the district administrators and the district as a whole see the value of your project. You're going to see it just day to day, but you need to make sure that you're able to represent that in your evaluation to the district. A reminder to tie in the success factors, pardon me, that Dr. Heron identified to the success indicators in the student equity plans. It's a good idea to track your success indicators. Sorry, I'm tongue-tied here. It helps ensure that you'll get refunded. It helps you identify areas for improvement, and it also helps you map your successes to your activities and your programs that are already in existence. Next slide, please. And Dr. Heron.
Thanks, Lindsay. So I also wanted to add, actually on this slide here, it's really important that you think about the evaluation of your project prior to implementation. So you can, so for instance, on number 3, tracking success indicators. It may seem straightforward, but if you don't, and it can be straightforward if the data exists. And I know that that's an area that oftentimes researchers will sort of sit down with faculty and staff in the collaboration of an evaluation project and quickly realize that certain data points that are really necessary for evaluation are not being tracked or systematically being tracked. So those kinds of things are really important because if you are seeing success, you want to be able to tie that success back to the activity or the program that you've implemented. And that's difficult to do without a really solid evaluation plan. So one last thing that I just sort of wanted to wrap up, as Will mentioned, I am the director for the Center for Organizational Responsibility and Advancement. And one of the major focuses of our center and one of the tenets of change that we really subscribe to is the idea of how we can affect positive change at multiple levels within an institution. We at the community college level tend to really live in the 2 middle bubbles. We do a lot of cohort programming, and we do a lot of intervention-based programming. And while those are really effective and useful tools for small groups of students, the high impact and systematic changes that we can see at the institutional level or at the practitioner level are likely to yield more significant and widespread results. So if there's ways that you can identify institutional level practices that you believe would be useful in changing to affect success, that's definitely an area that I would suggest exploring. And then practitioners, obviously, the people who work with students every day, yourselves, your peers, the culture that goes into the work that we engage in with our students, and how that culture sort of seeps into the interactions, and how that culture can also affect policy and practice, can have a huge impact on student success. So focusing on those two levels can oftentimes yield really positive results. Some other strategies that I always sort of wrap into conversations around equity is how to sort of model this idea of equity-mindedness in the work that we do. I know this webinar has really been focused quite a bit on how to, like, practical strategies for developing programs and getting funding and finding data, but I would be remiss if I didn't also mention how we, how we talk about equity, how we talk about our students, what assumptions we make about the students that we work with, what assumptions we make about the peers that we work with. I think it's really important to develop your equity framework, read information, read the studies that are out there in your discipline or around your student population that you serve, inform yourself about trends, about programs that have been successful around the country, the direction that higher education is going across the nation or across the state. Again, know the data. There's a lot of story lives in the data that has yet to be uncovered, and it's only when we sort of all convert ourselves into practitioner researchers that we are going to have the capacity to start uncovering those stories and trends. Further, really understanding how the data and the metrics are connected. So how does course success tie into degree completion? How does basic skills sequence completion tie into 30-unit persistence? How does placement play a role, assessment and placement practices play a role in completion and transfer? I mean, all of the metrics that we use to measure success are connected, and all of the changes that we make don't happen in a vacuum, and they can all create ripple effects throughout those different metrics. Reframe conversations. This can be a really difficult task when you're in large groups. We believe at Cora and at my current institution, we do this quite a bit, that the onus is really has to be shifted to institutions if we really want to see significant improvements in terms of student success. Historically, we have adopted sort of a deficit perspective when it comes to why students are or are not succeeding. And we tend to focus quite a bit on what students aren't doing and how students aren't prepared and what students need to be doing better, rather than focusing on our institutions and the barriers that we put in place and the change that we can enact in order to remove those barriers and create more streamlined pathways for students to be successful. As you start to integrate into the equity conversations even more, creating ground rules for discussion, informing your peers about the students that you work with and what kind of nomenclature is used, what kind of verbiage is appropriate. All of those things can be taken for, like, we can take those things for granted sometimes when we're immersed into the work every day. So it's important to set out those sort of that knowledge out for the broader groups when it comes to discussion and how we talk about students. And then acknowledging our own biases and levels of privilege is always a constant area of reflection and area of improvement for our own consciousness. So we have a list of resources available in the PowerPoint. Many of these are things that we've already shown you. Some of them are new or other areas where you can find additional resources regarding student equity and DSPS services and resources. So feel free to click through those links in the PowerPoint that we'll send you. And with that, I believe we are open for questions if there's time.
So according to my timepiece, we have plenty of time. By that I mean we have at least 15 minutes. So please feel free to insert any questions you may have into the chat box. So our first question is, what equity services do you have or know about for deaf students?
That's a good question. I don't know. This is Lindsay. I don't know of any. I know that there was one proposal in the works here at Srjc, and I don't know beyond that. Maybe either Will or Dr. Heron have more information.
I'm gonna defer this question to my DSPS experts here, my peers, as I'm mostly focused on the research.
So if someone participating has a response to that, please feel free to insert that into the text box as well. I do not have a direct answer for that, but if we do not obtain one on this call, I will be certain to find out from our colleagues who may have an answer and provide that to you. I see the question came from JR033. Go ahead.
So this is Lindsay. I have one question for the person who asked that. Is what do you have a specific area that you feel like needs to be addressed as part of student equity at your campus or at your college?
While we're waiting for that response, if others want to insert a question, you may do so. In addition to that, I just inserted a link into the chat box to a short SurveyMonkey survey. If you could provide feedback on today's webinar, that will be extremely helpful. One of the reasons why we have provided these webinars on equity is because of the feedback that we obtain. So your feedback today will be very helpful and we'll be certain to implement any of the ideas that you have regarding these or similar topics. So JR033, if you could indicate any additional info. Okay, great, thank you. So yes, we serve 30 deaf and hard of hearing students on campus, and support programs seem to not be enough. I'm thinking of creating an equity plan for skills coaches that are deaf themselves to provide additional support.
Okay, so my question would be, what's the additional support look like, and how does that tie into equity? Is it access, maybe accessing services is disproportionately impacted for deaf, hard of hearing? Is it course completion? So which of those success indicators does it tie into? And what does the plan say? You know, what are the areas for this population identified both at your campus and statewide? And, you know, addressing that as you explain your services in requesting. So I hope that makes sense. I'm just trying to draw the line between what is your campus identified as the disproportional impact, and what are you identifying, and what are those additional services look like?
You're welcome. So other questions? And JR033, feel free to follow up with me via email. Maybe we can get additional answers via the DSPS or DSS listserv, and maybe we have colleagues across the state who are doing some intentional work with the population you are seeking to serve. Thank you for the question.
Well, I wanted to add that what I described at Srjc was, there was, you know, the initial plan, and then there were the projects funded and written into the plan, and then there were some leftover funds both locally and carryover funds available at the state level, and that's where that one-time funding came from. Either the campuses that were allocated the funds weren't able to disperse and expend them in time, and so they were returned, or people requested more money than they needed to get off the ground, that sort of thing. So the student equity funding is, you know, ever changing. So it's important to keep your eye on that. You can keep in contact with your student equity representative on your campus about what funding is available. You know, sometimes there's a notice about additional funding, but, you know, you have to expend it by the end of the fiscal year, so June 30th. So having a plan ready to go, just in case that happens, is probably wise.
Thank you, Lindsay. Additional questions? We still have a few minutes, and we can take additional questions. Sorry for the feedback from my end. I'm right across from the Ronald Reagan Hospital, and at times it gets sort of busy here. Again, we're open at this time for additional questions. Please feel free to insert your questions into the chat box. Okay, I hope I'm not cutting anyone off while I am speaking. If you have a question and you've started typing, please continue your question and insert it into the chat box. We'll be certain to get to it. I would like to begin, though, thanking all the participants for having joined us today, and for our presenters, Dr. Bridget Herron and Lindsay Eigenar, for sharing the wealth of their knowledge with the California community colleges today. And am certain that these conversations will continue, and we look forward to hearing from you via the survey. I indicated in the chat box that we're thinking it should take between 2 to 4 minutes to complete, if not shorter. So if you would click on the link, I think the survey will open right up and you can complete it. And you might, if you started it when I started speaking just now, maybe you're finishing it up. But we will wait a minute or two and see if there's another question. But thank you so much for joining us today. We always get the question about whether or not these sessions are recorded. So this session was recorded and will be made available likely within a week, if not sooner. And we'll send a copy of the archive recording to everyone who participated today and those who requested it via email. While we continue to wait, I'd like to thank Mark Crossley and his agency for providing captioning services today. And I'm seeing no further questions. So if you did have a question and didn't want to share it publicly, please feel free to send it to me via email and we'll be certain to provide a response. Thanks everyone for having joined us for today's webinar. I will let the window remain open for a few more minutes. But again, thank you for having joined us for the webinar.